Apache girl came only as the widowed rancher's Christmas cook, until he fell in love with her. Snow fell that morning in wide, drifting sheets, the kind that quiet a whole valley and make a lone cabin seem like the center of the world. Gage Mercer opened his door, expecting only the crack of winter wind. Instead, he found a figure standing still as a pine tree, her dark hair heavy with snowflakes, her breath rising faintly in the cold. For a moment he thought she was a trick of the light, something the lonely season shaped just to test him. But she didn't vanish. She blinked once, steady and unafraid, and curiosity slipped into the space between them, thin as the steam rising from her lips. And something in her eyes suggested she had walked far for something she could not speak. He had been waiting for someone else entirely. A town widow, a woman with kind letters and a promise to cook through Christmas in exchange for a warm roof. But this woman standing before him carried no letters, no apron, no reason he could guess. Only a small pouch of herbs hung at her side, and her clothing, soft buckskin, stitched and mended by hand, told him she was Apache. He felt a tightening in his chest, the kind that came from sudden shame and the fear the world might see him hesitate. Still, she stood so calmly he couldn't bring himself to shut the door. He noticed the tired set of her shoulders, the quiet strength in the way she held her fingers close to warmth. And before he could speak, a question passed through his mind. What suffering had driven her to his doorstep in a storm this harsh? "I'm Taji Lozin," she said softly, her voice warm yet uncertain. "I was told a widowed rancher needed a cook for the winter. They sent me." Gage's jaw tensed. Of all the things he expected this season, another lonely Christmas, another year without laughter, this was not it. He felt the sting of town gossip already forming in the wind. Yet beneath that, something older stirred. No one walked miles through a blizzard unless they had nowhere else to go. No one looked at a stranger's door with that mixture of hope and dread unless life had already taken too much. And he wondered, against his own caution, what story she wasn't telling him. He stepped aside, a gesture small but heavy with conflict. She entered with silence, fitting the snow itself. Inside the warm room, she stood near the hearth as if afraid her presence might disturb the very air. Gage closed the door, the latch sounding louder than he wanted. She placed her pouch on the table, and a faint scent rose from it, cedar, sage, something earthy, something old. She touched the herbs, as if reminding herself they had meaning. He watched her in the fire glow, unsure why her stillness made the cabin feel less empty. And he wondered why someone who carried herself like a wounded deer would choose to work for a man known for living like a ghost. "You can warm yourself," he murmured. She nodded, but she did not step closer to the fire. Her eyes scanned the cabin, the single bed, the rocking chair left untouched since his wife died last Christmas, the half-mended gloves on the table. He felt exposed under her quiet gaze, like she could see how sorrow still lived here. And for a moment, he wondered what she saw in him that caused her shoulders to ease, just slightly. To distract himself, Gage cleared his throat and reached for the kettle. "You came far," he said, though it sounded like a question. She touched her wrist, rubbing a faint scar there. "Far enough. Work is work. And winter doesn't care where we come from." Her words were simple, but he felt the weight beneath them. Something in her tone hinted at a kind of survival he knew too well. And he wondered, though he tried not to, who had left her alone in such a storm, and why she carried herself as if she expected kindness to vanish at any moment. Steam rose as he poured hot water into 2 cups. Taji stepped closer then, only an inch, but it felt like a choice she had debated. He handed her a cup, careful not to touch her fingers. She accepted it with both hands, her breath curling into the rising warmth. Their eyes met, and he noticed how calm hers were, how they held a softness that didn't match the world outside or the bruised winter around them. And he wondered, briefly and unwillingly, how long it had been since anyone looked at him without pity. They sat at the table, the fire crackling behind them. Taji glanced at his hands, rough, scarred, the hands of the man who chopped wood to silence grief. He felt heat crawl into his neck. "I can start cooking when you want," she said. "No rush," he replied, though his voice betrayed a tremor. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded with a grace he didn't expect. She rose quietly and began to unpack her small bundle of food, dried berries, a handful of cornmeal, a bit of smoked meat. She moved with purpose, each sound soft, each gesture careful. He realized then that she had been taught to take up as little space as possible. And the thought pressed something painful in his chest, something he had not felt for anyone in a long time. When she lit the stove, the soft glow curved around her figure, turning her silhouette into something gentle against the cold. He watched her stir a small pot, the scent of herbs drifting like memory across the room. It reminded him of a time before tragedy, before he learned how silence could fill every corner of a house. He almost asked her why she had come alone, why she had taken a job meant for someone else. But there was something sacred about her silence, and he feared breaking it. And he wondered if she, too, felt the strange thread forming between them, thin yet undeniable. Outside, the wind shifted. Snow flurries pressed against the windows, thickening into a storm that belonged more to the mountains than the plains. Taji paused and looked at the door as if tracking something unseen. "You live far from town," she murmured. "Too far," Gage admitted. "Most folks think I've lost my mind staying here." Her lips curved faintly. "But you stayed anyway." "Habit," he muttered. "And ghost memories." Her eyes softened in a way that made him swallow. She understood. She didn't need to say it. She moved a little closer then, intentionally or not, the space shrinking between them as the storm rose outside. And he wondered if she sensed the loneliness curling through him like a root seeking warmth. The storm grew louder, rattling the shutters. Gage walked to the window to check the sky. The whiteout was nearly complete. "Roads closed now," he said quietly. "You'll have to stay." "I guessed," she replied in a small voice. He turned toward her. "You can take my wife's old room." Taji froze. A shadow crossed her expression. Respect, sorrow, and something like reluctance. "I don't want to disturb her things," she said. "You won't," he whispered, though his voice cracked on the lie. "It's just a room now." But as she followed him toward that door, he felt the weight of the moment twist inside him. He hadn't let anyone walk that hallway since last year. He wasn't sure why he was letting her. And he wondered if opening that door meant he was opening something else too, something he had kept locked away since the night his world changed. He pushed the door open. Cold air seeped out, smelling faintly of lavender and dust. Taji stepped inside, her eyes moving over the neatly folded quilts, the empty rocking chair, the untouched dresser. She stood perfectly still, as if sensing the history in the room, the grief layered like snow. He watched her from the doorway, heart tightening, because in that quiet moment she didn't look like a stranger at all. She looked like someone who understood the language of loss. She placed her fingertips on the edge of the bed, barely touching it, her breath catching softly. Then she turned to him. Her voice, when it came, was gentle as snowfall. "Thank you, Gage Mercer. I will take care of this room. I will cook for you. And I will not bring trouble here." Her promise felt heavier than she intended. He wanted to tell her she was not a burden, not trouble, not unwanted. But the words tangled in his throat. Instead, he nodded once slowly. She bowed her head in return. As he stepped back into the hallway, he felt a strange shift, small, subtle, but powerful enough to make him pause. Something in his home had changed, in the air, in the shadows. The storm roared outside, sealing them in together for the night. And though he tried to steady himself, he couldn't help but wonder how a woman who arrived as a stranger could already feel like the start of a story he wasn't ready for, yet couldn't turn away from. The morning after the storm broke with a quiet hush. Sunlight, pale and trembling, reflected off the thick blanket of snow, and the cabin seemed smaller somehow, yet warmer, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the laughter and cautious hope of the night before. Gage rose early, still stiff from sitting by the fire too long, and found that Taji Lozen had already moved through the cabin, sweeping the hearth, arranging firewood, and leaving small bundles of herbs beside each window. Her touch lingered like a whisper on everything she passed. He watched from the doorway, chest tightening in a way that startled him, because he realized the house had not felt so alive in years, not since before sorrow had settled over every corner. And he wondered, even as he tried to shake it off, how a stranger could claim such power over the quiet of his home so quickly. Taji caught his gaze briefly and offered a faint smile. "The storm left its marks," she said softly, voice like snow settling on pine. "It is good to clear them." He nodded, unsure if he meant the cabin or himself. He wondered if she could see the ache beneath his stoicism, the loneliness that had grown like frost in every unused chair and unlit corner. By mid-morning, Gage decided they would ride into town for supplies, the silence between them taut with unspoken words. Taji wrapped a heavy wool shawl around her shoulders, the fabric brushing his hand as he adjusted it, and for a heartbeat, both felt the quiet thrill of contact that did not demand confession. The town's main street was alive with judgmental eyes. Neighbors peeked from shuttered windows, and Maud Harper's sharp gaze cut across them like a knife. Whispers, half-hidden and fully venomous, threaded through the air. "Red-skinned girl with the widower," they said, as though the words carried power to undo everything. Taji lowered her eyes, steadying her breath, while Gage felt a swell of protective fire. "Stay close," he murmured, and she nodded, shoulders straightening. He noticed then that her courage was not born of bravado. It was quiet, deliberate, and it shone even against the sting of prejudice. As they passed the general store, the sheriff, Calder Reeves, observed them with calm, assessing eyes. Gage's fingers brushed the reins tightly. He knew the storm of town whispers was nothing compared to what might come if men with more malice than sense appeared. Inside the store, Taji's movements were precise. She weighed flour, selected dried meat, and organized small jars of herbs, her motions creating a rhythm that filled the small space with subtle warmth. The clerk, aware of the stares, kept his distance, but Taji's calm insistence made the act of shopping feel sacred, deliberate. Gage watched her, chest tightening with a mixture of pride and wonder. Every gesture, no matter how simple, deepened the gravity of her presence. And he realized the stirrings in his heart were no longer curiosity. They were something heavier, something worth naming, but dangerous to admit aloud. The ride back was silent except for the crunch of snow beneath their horses' hooves. Gage finally broke the quiet, pointing toward a frost-bitten tree line. "This land, it feels less lonely with you here." Taji glanced at him, her dark eyes flickering, understanding the confession unspoken. He did not say more, but the tension between them tightened like coiled rope. Even in silence, they were drawing closer, each gesture and glance a tether binding them tighter. Late afternoon brought a surge of danger. Elias Boone, stirred by the town's whisperings, gathered a handful of riders. The men, fueled by suspicion and small-mindedness, advanced toward Gage's cabin, their intent clear even through the thickening snow. Gage spotted them first, squinting through the blur of flakes and white light. The muscles in his shoulders tensed, the pulse in his neck throbbed. He dismounted, leaving Taji behind with instructions to stay close to the cabin door, and felt the familiar weight of fear, the fear for her, for the fragile possibility of safety he had never allowed himself to claim before. And he wondered if courage was something one learned in solitude, or something borrowed from those who would not leave you behind. The riders pounded the cabin door with force, their voices sharp against the wind. "Send her out. She doesn't belong here," one shouted. Gage stepped forward, hands raised in calm defiance. "She stays," he said, voice low but unwavering. "She works for me, and she is under my protection." The wind seemed to roar approval, whipping snow into blinding sheets around them. The riders hesitated, unsure if the man they believed weak could summon such quiet authority. One gun cocked, threatening violence, but Gage did not falter. Then Taji stepped forward, her boots crunching on the snow, the shawl trailing lightly behind her. Her eyes scanned the men, and her voice rang out, steady and melodic. "This land belongs to winter and to those who honor it. Leave now, or face what frost and storm teach the reckless." The snow lifted in spirals around her as if the mountains themselves obeyed her command. The riders, unnerved by her bravery and the fierceness in her eyes, slowly retreated into the storm. Gage felt his chest release a weight he had carried since grief first took hold, and he realized he could never see her as just a cook again. When the last echo of hooves faded, Gage approached her, boots crunching on snow-dusted ground. "You saved us both," he murmured, voice husky. She turned, gaze softening as it met his. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the wind moved between them, gentle now, a witness to the quiet triumph. Gage reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers, and felt the warmth bloom through both of them. Inside by the fire, the cabin seemed to hum with life. Gage watched her arrange the hearth and fold blankets, noting how her every movement carried intention, grace, and the resilience of someone who had known loss but refused to be consumed by it. Finally, he sat beside her, voice trembling though he tried to steady it. "I don't need a cook," he said, quiet. "I need you." Her hand found his cheek, soft as falling snow, and he leaned into her touch, tasting the possibility of hope he had long denied himself. The first kiss was slow, deliberate, a collision of winter and warmth, of grief and desire, of two souls who had wandered lonely paths only to meet at the threshold of chance. Their breath mingled in the firelight. The storm raged outside, but inside, silence and heat wrapped them. And when Gage finally asked, voice catching, "Will you stay with me forever?" her answer was a whisper carried by the flames and snow. Yes. That night, they would quietly by the hearth, wrapped in furs, firelight dancing across their faces. The cabin, once silent and haunted by absence, hummed with laughter, whispered blessings, and the intimate rhythm of shared life beginning anew. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake a small witness to courage, choice, and the love that had bloomed through trial and quiet grace. Years later, the tale of that Christmas in the snow lived on. Locals claimed that if one passed the cabin on a clear winter night, shadows of a man and a woman dancing by the fire could still be seen, a testament to the power of patience, courage, and the unexpected ways love finds those ready to receive it. And the story reminded all who listened that some hearts, long thought frozen, can thaw in the gentlest ways, if only one allows warmth to enter slowly, quietly, and without demand.